I'm a virgin and you need 5 sons. That's what an obese girl begged the giant mountain man in front of the whole church, with every eye fixed on her shame. The townsfolk laughed, but the mountain man did the unthinkable. He took her hand, and in that moment turned her humiliation into destiny. Out in the storm, he carried her home to his lonely cabin, where secrets run deep, scars from war, a lost love who abandoned him, and enemies who will stop at nothing to steal his land. But this girl, mocked as weak, is about to become his greatest strength. With every prayer, every chore, every tender moment by the fire, she finds herself standing taller until the railroad men strike and the giant is dragged in chains. Now she must face the town alone with a truth that could break her, or save them both. Can a woman everyone laughed at become the courage a broken man needs? Or will the frontier's cruelty crush their only chance at love and family? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The bitter wind howled through the gaps in the church's wooden walls as Bianca stood trembling before the congregation. Her heart thundered in her chest, and her cheeks burned with shame at the cruel laughter echoing through the pews. She had spoken from desperation, yes, but also from a deep well of truth within her soul. The words had burst forth before she could stop them, shocking even herself with their boldness. I'm a virgin, and you need 5 sons. Take me before it's too late. The words hung in the air like frost, drawing more jeers from the assembled townsfolk. Someone in the back called out a cruel joke about her size, sending fresh waves of laughter through the church. Bianca's legs weakened beneath her, threatening to give way. The tin lanterns swaying overhead cast dancing shadows across the floorboards, and she fixed her gaze on them, willing herself not to cry. But then the heavy tread of boots filled the sudden quiet. Wilbert Red's massive frame moved through the crowd like a bear through underbrush. The townspeople drew back, their laughter dying in their throats as the scarred mountain man approached. His presence commanded attention, though he rarely spoke more than a few words when he came to town for supplies. Bianca forced herself to look up at him, taking in the rough beard that partially hid his war wounds, the grave set of his jaw, the unexpected gentleness in his dark eyes. He towered over her, blocking out the lamplight, and for a moment the rest of the world seemed to fade away. No one mocks a woman of courage, he declared, his deep voice filling the church. If she asks me, I'll give her a home. His calloused hand extended toward her, massive and weathered but held out with surprising delicacy. Bianca placed her smaller hand in his, feeling the strength and warmth of his grip. The touch sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold draft sweeping through the building. Reverend Green cleared his throat from his place at the pulpit, his thin face showing both concern and approval. Then if there are no objections, I can perform the ceremony now, before the storm worsens. But Wilbert shook his head, still holding Bianca's hand. We'll do this proper, Reverend. When the weather clears. For now, I'm taking her home where it's warm. The disapproving murmurs from the congregation made Bianca's stomach clench, but Wilbert's steady presence beside her gave her strength. He helped her into her worn wool coat, his big hands careful and respectful. But the proprieties! Mrs. Whitaker, the banker's wife, protested from her front row seat. You can't take an unmarried woman to your homestead. What will people say? They'll say what they always say, Wilbert replied evenly, wrapping his own heavy coat around Bianca's shoulders when he saw her thin garment. The coat engulfed her, still warm from his body, smelling of pine smoke and leather. But she'll be safe and warm, and that matters more than talk. Reverend Green stepped down from the pulpit, his boots clicking on the wooden floor. Brother Red is right. The storm's getting worse, and his homestead is closer than the widow's boarding house where Miss Bethany's been staying. I trust his word and his honor. The circuit preacher's quiet authority helped still the muttering crowd. Wilbert guided Bianca toward the door, his broad frame sheltering her from the stares and whispers. The heavy wooden doors creaked open, letting in a blast of snow and wind that set the lanterns swaying wildly. The light flickered across the faces of the townsfolk, their expressions ranging from scandal to sympathy to lingering mockery. Just before they stepped out, Bianca heard someone whisper, "Well, I reckon the mountain man's the only one who could handle such a large—" The rest of the cruel comment was cut off by Wilbert suddenly turning, his eyes flashing dangerously as he surveyed the crowd. No one would meet his gaze. Without a word, he turned back to Bianca, his expression softening as he helped her down the icy steps. Outside, the storm had transformed the world into a swirling white void. The wind cut through Bianca's skirts despite Wilbert's coat, and snow immediately began collecting in her hair. She could barely see the hitching post where Wilbert's big bay horse waited, stamping its hooves against the cold. Wilbert led her through the deep snow, his strong arm supporting her when she stumbled. At the horse, he turned to her, his face serious in the dim light filtering from the church windows. "Miss Bethany," he said, his voice barely audible above the wind. "Are you certain about this?" "There's still time to go back inside." Bianca looked up at him, reading the concern in his expression, the way he waited patiently for her answer despite the cutting cold. In that moment, she saw past his intimidating size and scars to the gentle heart beneath. This was a man who would never laugh at her, never make her feel less than she was. "I'm certain," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I meant what I said in there, all of it." Something shifted in his eyes, respect, perhaps, or the first spark of something warmer. Without another word, he lifted her onto his horse as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. His hands were firm but gentle, careful of her dignity even in such an intimate moment. He swung up behind her, gathering the reins in one hand, while the other arm circled her waist to hold her secure. The solid warmth of his chest against her back chased away some of the cold, and she found herself leaning into his strength as the horse moved forward into the storm. Behind them, the church doors opened one last time, spilling lamplight onto the snow. Reverend Green's voice carried faintly through the wind. "God go with you both." Then they were moving through the white darkness, the horse's hooves breaking through the deepening snow. Bianca couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, but Wilbert seemed to know the way by instinct. The wind howled around them, drowning out any possibility of conversation, but the steady rhythm of his breathing and the secure circle of his arm told her everything she needed to know. As they left the settlement behind, Bianca felt the last echoes of cruel laughter fade away, replaced by the wild music of the storm. She had done something both foolish and brave, speaking out in that church. But as she sat wrapped in Wilbert's coat, protected by his strength, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. The snow continued to fall, erasing their tracks behind them, while ahead lay the unknown territory of their future together. But for now, in this moment between what was and what would be, Bianca found herself thanking God for giving her the courage to stand up and speak her truth. Whatever came next, she was no longer alone. The wind howled fiercer now, whipping snow into stinging clouds as Wilbert led Bianca around the church to where his sleigh waited. Two massive percherons stamped their feathered hooves against the deepening drifts, their breath forming thick plumes in the frozen air. The sturdy wooden sleigh sat ready, its metal runners gleaming dully in the dim light from the church windows. Bianca hesitated at the sight of the steep step-up, but Wilbert's strong hands lifted her as gently as if she were made of spun glass. She settled onto the leather seat, drawing his coat tighter around her shoulders. The familiar scents of pine smoke and leather wrapped around her like a comfort from her childhood, when her father would carry her to bed on winter nights. Wilbert checked the horse's harnesses one final time, his big hands moving with surprising dexterity despite the cold. He spoke softly to the team, his low voice barely audible above the storm. The horse's ears flicked toward him, recognition clear in their intelligent eyes. These were working animals, strong enough to pull logs and clear fields, yet they responded to his touch like pets. He climbed in beside her, gathering the reins in his gloved hands. The sleigh jerked forward, runners creaking against the snow. They passed the shuttered general store, its windows dark and lifeless. The blacksmith's shop stood silent, the forge's usual orange glow extinguished by the storm. Empty corrals and frozen pastures stretched beyond the town's edge, barely visible through the whirling white. Neither spoke as the sleigh jolted over hidden ruts. Bianca felt tears sliding down her cheeks, freezing before they could fall. The memory of cruel laughter echoed in her mind, mixing with the howl of the wind. She had known there would be mockery when she stood up in church, but the reality had cut deeper than she'd expected. Wilbert glanced at her, his expression shadowed in the growing darkness. Without a word, he reached behind the seat and pulled out a thick bearskin cloak. He draped it over her lap, tucking it carefully around her legs. "The climb gets steeper from here," he said, his deep voice carrying clearly despite the storm. "Trail's narrow. Might take an hour yet." Bianca nodded, unable to trust her voice. The bearskin was incredibly warm, and she found herself relaxing slightly as its weight settled over her. The horses plodded steadily onward, their massive shoulders straining against the drifts. Wilbert handled the reins with quiet confidence, guiding them around dangerous drops and through the deepest snow. The journey passed in a blur of white and shadow. Bianca caught glimpses of towering pines through the storm, their branches heavy with snow. Sometimes the sleigh would slide sideways slightly on a turn, but Wilbert's steady hands always brought them back to safety. The horses seemed to know every step of the way, even when Bianca could barely see the trail ahead. Finally, an orange glow appeared through the curtain of snow. As they drew closer, Bianca made out the shape of a substantial log cabin, its windows warmly lit. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, immediately torn away by the wind. Snow had drifted nearly to the roofline on one side, transforming the building into something from a fairy tale. Wilbert guided the sleigh into the shelter of a barn built into the hillside. The sudden absence of wind made Bianca's ears ring. He helped her down, then quickly unharnessed the horses. She watched as he led them into comfortable stalls, removing their tack with practiced efficiency and rubbing them down with handfuls of clean straw. "They're beautiful animals," she said softly, finding her voice at last. Wilbert nodded as he poured grain into their mangers. Jake and Jesse. Brothers. Had them since they were colts. His tone held genuine affection as he patted each broad neck. Their family. He gathered their things from the sleigh and led her through the snow to the cabin's heavy door. Inside, warmth and firelight wrapped around them like a blessing. Bianca stood just inside the threshold, taking in her surroundings while Wilbert moved to stoke the fire. The cabin was larger than she'd expected, with thick log walls and a plank floor worn smooth by years of use. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, while handmade furniture, a table, chairs, and a settle, filled the main room. Everything was immaculately clean, if plain. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, and she spotted a Bible on a small table near a reading chair. "Sit," Wilbert said, gesturing to a chair near the fire. "I'll heat up some stew." Bianca sank into the chair, finally beginning to feel her frozen fingers and toes. She watched as Wilbert moved competently around the kitchen area, stirring contents of a covered pot that hung near the fire. The domestic sight of this giant, scarred man preparing food touched something deep in her heart. Soon they sat across from each other at the table, steam rising from bowls of venison stew. Wilbert had also set out fresh bread and butter, along with cups of hot coffee. The food was simple but good, speaking of skill and care in its preparation. "Did you," Bianca began, then hesitated. She forced herself to continue, needing to know. Did you truly mean to take me as wife? Or was it just kindness, saving me from shame? Wilbert set down his spoon, meeting her eyes directly. If God gave me such a brave bride, who am I to refuse? His voice was quiet but firm. You spoke true in church. Showed more courage than any there. He paused, something darker crossing his expression. But there's things you should know before you decide to stay. He pushed his bowl aside, leaning forward slightly. This land, it's good land. Valleys fertile, waters pure. Railroad wants it for a spur line. Been sending agents, trying to pressure folks to sell. Some claim jumpers too, thinking to force me out. His scarred face hardened. Won't let them take what's mine. What could be ours? But it won't be easy living with that hanging over us. Bianca's hand trembled slightly as she lifted her coffee cup, but her voice was steady. I'm not afraid. She took a careful sip, then set the cup down. I've been unwanted, unliked, unloved most of my life. But I know how to work hard, how to endure. She met his gaze. I won't run from trouble. Something flickered in Wilbert's eyes. Respect, perhaps, or the beginning of understanding. He nodded slowly. Then we'll face it together. He rose from the table, gathering their empty bowls. I've made up a bed for you in the spare room. Clean quilts, fresh straw in the tick. Door has a lock if you want it. He showed her to a small but neat room off the main living area. True to his word, a bed had been carefully made up with colorful quilts. A washstand held a pitcher and basin, and a small window looked out into the storm. A door latch with a wooden peg for locking was clearly new, probably added while she and Wilbert had eaten. Sleep well, he said simply, turning to leave. We'll talk more in the morning. Bianca watched him go, noting how he pulled the door firmly closed behind him. She could hear him moving about in the main room, banking the fire for the night. The sounds were oddly comforting, proof that she was no longer alone. She changed into her nightgown, shivering in the cooler air of the bedroom. The quilts were thick and soft as she slid between them, and the straw tick molded comfortably to her body. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the storm rage outside while remembering the gentle way Wilbert had tucked the bearskin around her in the sleigh. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was that perhaps God had heard her prayers after all, sending her not a handsome prince, but something far better. A good man with a gentle heart, who saw her courage instead of her size. Whether love would grow between them remained to be seen, but for now she was warm, safe, and no longer facing the world alone. The pale blue light of dawn crept through the small window, rousing Bianca from her first night's sleep in Wilbert's cabin. Her muscles protested as she sat up, stiff from yesterday's long sleigh ride. The quilts had kept her warm through the night, but now the air held a distinct chill. She dressed quickly in her warmest dress, trying to move quietly across the creaking floorboards. When she emerged from her room, Wilbert was already awake, stoking the fire back to life. He acknowledged her with a nod, then pulled on his heavy coat. Stock needs tending, he said simply. Care to help? Bianca wrapped herself in her shawl and followed him outside. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. The sunrise painted everything in shades of crystal and pearl, so beautiful it nearly took her breath away. But there was no time to admire the view. Work waited. Wilbert led her first to the chicken coop, showing her where he kept the feed and explaining his routine. The hens clucked and scratched eagerly as Bianca scattered corn, though she struggled to maintain her balance on the slippery ground. Her size made it difficult to bend and move in the confined space, but she persisted, determined to learn every detail. They lay better when fed same time each morning, Wilbert explained, gathering eggs from the nesting boxes. His large hands were surprisingly gentle as he placed each egg carefully in his basket. Next came the horses, Jake and Jesse, waiting patiently in their stalls. Bianca watched as Wilbert demonstrated how to measure their grain and fill their water troughs. When it came time to haul hay from the loft, she insisted on helping despite her awkwardness on the ladder. Each armful left her wheezing slightly, but she refused to quit. "Don't have to push so hard," Wilbert said, noting her flushed face. "Takes time to build strength for this work." "I won't be useless," Bianca answered firmly, reaching for another bundle of hay. "I can learn." A slight nod was his only response, but she caught something like approval in his expression. The woodpile needed replenishing next. Wilbert's axe sang through the cold air, splitting logs with practiced efficiency. Bianca gathered the smaller pieces, stacking them neatly against the cabin wall. Her arms ached and her back protested, but there was satisfaction in seeing the pile grow. By noon, they had completed the essential morning chores. Bianca's hands were red from cold and work, but pride warmed her chest. She hadn't done everything perfectly, but she hadn't quit either. Inside the cabin, she warmed cornbread by the fire, while Wilbert prepared a simple stew. They ate in comfortable silence, letting the food restore their energy. When the meal was finished, Wilbert gestured for her to put on her coat again. "Want to show you something?" he said, leading her outside. They walked to a small rise behind the cabin, where the view opened up dramatically. Wilbert pointed to various landmarks, his deep voice carrying clearly in the winter air. "Pine Ridge there marks the northern boundary," he explained, indicating a dark line of trees. "Creek runs through the bottomland, frozen now, but come spring it'll water the whole valley." His face darkened slightly. "That's what they want." Railroad surveyors been marking lines through the best of it. Bianca followed his gaze across the snow-covered expanse. "It's beautiful land," she said softly. "Aye, worth fighting for." Wilbert's jaw tightened. "But claim jumpers watch for any weakness. Any sign I can't defend what's mine." He glanced at her. "That's partly why folks in town spread tales. Say the war left me savage. Easier than admitting they'd sell out to the railroad's gold." Bianca thought about the gentle way she'd seen him handle the horses and chickens, how carefully he'd tucked the bearskin around her in the sleigh. "They don't know you," she said simply. The afternoon passed in more chores, cleaning stalls, checking fences where they could reach them through the snow, and bringing in more firewood. By evening, Bianca's muscles were screaming, but satisfaction filled her. She'd proven to herself, if no one else, that she could work hard. After a simple supper of beans and the remaining cornbread, they settled by the fire. Wilbert pulled out a piece of pine wood and a small knife, his scarred hands moving with surprising delicacy as he began to carve. Bianca found her sewing kit and began mending a tear in her dress, the familiar motion of needle and thread soothing her tired muscles. The fire crackled companionably, filling what might have been an awkward silence with its warm voice. Occasionally, Bianca would glance up to find Wilbert focused intently on his carving, his large frame somehow less intimidating in the firelight. Wood shavings curled away from his knife, gathering like pale snow at his feet. When she finished mending the tear, Bianca folded her dress carefully. Her movement drew Wilbert's attention from his carving. "You sure you don't regret?" he asked softly, his deep voice barely louder than the fire's snap. Bianca felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she met his gaze steadily. "I asked, didn't I?" The words came out stronger than she'd expected, carrying all the certainty she felt about her choice. She saw something shift in his expression, not quite a smile, but a softening around his eyes. He nodded once, then returned to his carving. Bianca watched the firelight play across his concentrating face, realizing that for the first time in years, she felt truly at peace. The evening stretched on, wrapped in comfortable quiet. Neither felt the need to fill the silence with empty words. The shared work of the day had begun building something between them. Not love, not yet, but understanding. Trust, perhaps, or at least the foundation for it. Wilbert's hands moved steadily over the wood, shaping something only he could see. Bianca picked up another torn garment, letting the rhythm of her needle match the scratch of his knife. Outside, snow began falling again, soft and gentle this time. But inside the cabin, warmth and companionship held winter at bay. 2 days passed like a dream on the mountain homestead, with Bianca falling into the rhythm of frontier life. But supplies ran low, forcing a journey into Fairchance that made her stomach twist with dread. The morning dawned crisp and clear as Wilbert hitched the horses to the wagon, helping Bianca up onto the wooden seat beside him. The ride into town was quiet, broken only by the creak of leather harness and the steady clip of hooves on packed snow. Bianca kept her eyes fixed on her mittened hands folded in her lap, trying to steady her nerves. Wilbert seemed to sense her anxiety, driving the wagon so it avoided the worst bumps in the rutted road. As they approached the settlement, smoke rose from chimneys into the winter sky. A few townsfolk hurried along the boardwalks, collars turned up against the cold. The wagon rolled to a stop outside Miller's Mercantile, its weather-beaten sign creaking in the wind. "Wait here," Wilbert said, jumping down from the wagon. He circled around to help Bianca descend, his strong hands steady at her waist. Even through her heavy coat, she felt the gentle pressure of his grip, careful not to bruise. The bell above the door jangled as they entered the store. Warm air carried the familiar scents of coffee, leather, and tobacco. Mr. Miller looked up from his ledger, his round spectacles catching the light. "Morning, Red," he said cautiously, eyes darting between Wilbert and Bianca. Wilbert pulled a carefully written list from his coat pocket. "Need supplies," he said simply, handing it over. While Mr. Miller gathered their order, Bianca moved through the store, selecting thread and buttons for mending. The bell chimed again. 3 ranchers stomped snow from their boots, their loud voices filling the quiet store. Bianca kept her head down, pretending to study a display of fabric, but she felt their stares boring into her back. "Well, if it ain't Red and his new bride," one called out, voice thick with mockery. "Heard you found yourself some company for the cold months." Bianca's hands trembled as she touched a bolt of calico, trying to ignore them, but their whispers carried clearly in the small space. "More like a winter cow," another rancher laughed, not bothering to lower his voice. "Reckon she'll keep him warm enough." The fabric blurred before Bianca's eyes as tears threatened. Her chest tightened with familiar shame. She wanted to run, to hide from their cruel laughter, but her feet seemed frozen to the floor. Suddenly, Wilbert's massive presence loomed behind her. His hand settled on her shoulder, warm and protective. She felt rather than saw him turn to face the ranchers, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. "Respect my wife," he growled, the words carrying deadly warning beneath their quiet delivery. The laughter died instantly. In the ringing silence, Bianca heard one of the ranchers clear his throat nervously. Without another word, they shuffled out of the store, the bell marking their hasty retreat. Mr. Miller hurried to finish gathering their supplies, clearly eager to have them gone. Wilbert paid without comment, then helped Bianca load the wagon. The ride home seemed longer, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. Back at the cabin, Bianca moved mechanically through the motions of putting away supplies. When everything was stored, she retreated to her room, no longer able to hold back her tears. She sank onto her bed, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. A gentle knock at her door made her hastily wipe her eyes. "Come in," she managed, trying to steady her voice. Wilbert ducked through the doorway, his large frame making the room seem smaller. He stood awkwardly for a moment, then settled onto the room's single chair, which creaked beneath his weight. "Folks can be cruel," he said finally, his deep voice gentle. "Learned that after the war." His hand rose unconsciously to touch the thick scar that ran from temple to jaw. Bianca looked up, surprised by this rare mention of his past. Does it still hurt?" she asked softly. "Not the scar itself?" Wilbert's eyes grew distant. But the memory of what followed, that burned some days. He fell silent, and Bianca waited, sensing there was more to come. Outside, wind whistled around the cabin's corners, while inside the fire crackled steadily in the main room. "Had a sweetheart before I went to war," Wilbert continued finally. "Sarah was her name. Pretty thing, with yellow hair and laughing eyes. We were to marry when I returned." His large hands clenched briefly in his lap. "But when she saw what was left of me, well, pretty girls don't want scarred men who wake shouting in the night." Bianca's heart ached at the pain in his voice. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Wilbert shrugged his broad shoulders. "Was long ago now, but it taught me about people, how quick they are to judge what's different, what they fear." His eyes met hers. "Your courage in church, that's worth more than any pretty face." Heat rose in Bianca's cheeks at his words. She looked down, unable to hold his intense gaze. "Thank you," she murmured, "for defending me today." "You're my wife now," Wilbert said simply. "No man disrespects you while I draw breath." He rose, the chair groaning in relief. "Rest if you need. I'll see to the evening chores." After he left, Bianca sat quietly, his words echoing in her mind. Wife. The title still felt strange, but somehow right. When she finally emerged from her room, the sun was setting, painting the snow-covered valley in shades of rose and gold. She began tidying the main room, straightening items displaced during their hasty departure that morning. On the small shelf above the fireplace, Wilbert's Bible lay open. As she lifted it to dust beneath, several folded papers slipped from between its pages. Bianca started to tuck them back, then froze as she caught a glimpse of feminine handwriting. Though she knew she shouldn't, she couldn't help scanning the faded words. "My dearest Will, cannot marry a man so changed. Pray you understand. Best for us both." Her hands shaking, Bianca carefully refolded the letters and returned them to their hiding place. She turned to find Wilbert in the doorway, watching her. Lamplight caught the silver threads in his dark hair and threw his scars into sharp relief. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to pry." "No matter," he replied, moving to hang his coat by the door. "Past is past." But Bianca understood now why he had accepted her bold proposal, why he spoke of wanting 5 sons. The dream of family still lived in him, burning beneath his quiet exterior like banked coals waiting to flame. She watched his profile as he moved around the cabin, noting how the lamplight softened his fierce features. This man, who had lost so much yet, still found the strength to defend her, to offer her a home and name. Something warm unfurled in her chest, a feeling she didn't quite dare to name. The evening settled around them like a comfortable blanket as they moved through their usual routine, Wilbert carving by the fire while Bianca sewed. But now a deeper understanding flowed between them, built on shared pain and growing trust. Dawn broke over the mountain valley, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pearl and gold. Bianca stepped onto the cabin's porch, breathing in the crisp morning air. A thin spiral of wood smoke rose from the chimney, carrying the scent of pine and breakfast coffee. Movement at the edge of the tree line caught her eye. A woman emerged from the shadows, her dark shawl drawn close against the cold. She carried a covered basket, moving with quiet grace through the deep snow. As she drew closer, Bianca noticed the intricate beadwork on her dress and the careful way she scanned her surroundings. The cabin door creaked behind her as Wilbert stepped out. "Tiana," he called softly, raising his hand in greeting. "Welcome." The Apache woman nodded, climbing the steps with measured dignity. Her face was weathered but beautiful, marked by both hardship and strength. "The winter spirits dance early this year," she said, her English clear but carrying the melody of her native tongue. "I brought herbs before the snow grows deeper." Wilbert gestured them both inside, where the fire's warmth wrapped around them like a blanket. Tiana set her basket on the table, unwrapping layers of cloth to reveal bundles of dried plants and roots. The earthy scent of medicine filled the cabin. "For fever and cough," Tiana explained, sorting the bundles. "The winter will be long." Her dark eyes moved to Bianca, assessing but not unkind. "You have taken a wife?" "She chose me," Wilbert answered, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. "At the church meeting." Tiana's expression softened as she looked at Bianca again. "Brave heart," she said quietly. "Good match for this one." She nodded toward Wilbert. "He has courage too, though few know it." Bianca settled into a chair, drawn by the woman's quiet strength. "How do you know my husband?" she asked, Tiana's hands stilled over her herbs. 3 winters past, my youngest son wandered too far from our camp. Army patrol was searching the hills that day, claiming to hunt raiders. Her voice carried old fear. They would have taken him, called him spy or worse. But your man. She looked at Wilbert with deep respect. He found my boy first, brought him to safety before soldiers came. Few whites would risk helping Apache child. Bianca turned to Wilbert, who stood uncomfortably by the fire. She had never imagined such a story behind his gruff exterior. "You never told anyone?" "Townfolk got their own ideas about Indians," he said quietly. "Better they don't know I help my neighbors." Tiana began wrapping her herbs again, but her movements were purposeful. "Speaking of neighbors," she said, "railroad men were marking creek bed yesterday, taking measurements, writing in books." Wilbert's expression darkened. "How many?" 3 men, one in fine coat, others with tools. Tiana tied her basket closed. They talked of water rights, where to build bridge. She rose, drawing her shawl closer. "I tell you this because you are friend to my people. Be careful, Wilbert read. Railroad men carry paper weapons sharper than knives." After Tiana left, silence filled the cabin. Bianca watched Wilbert stare into the fire, his scarred face troubled. "Why do you hide such noble deeds?" she asked finally. "The town might respect you more if they knew." Wilbert turned from the flames, his eyes meeting hers. "Better they think me a brute than meddle with my friends," he said simply. "Apache got enough trouble without folks knowing they visit here." The day passed in a blur of chores and worried thoughts about the railroad men. As afternoon faded toward evening, Wilbert announced they needed to check the fence lines before dark. Bianca pulled on her heavy coat and followed him out into the gathering dusk. They worked their way along the property boundary, testing posts and mending loose wire. Bianca's gloved hands grew skilled at holding the strands while Wilbert secured them. The physical labor warmed her despite the cold air. At one post, their hands brushed as they both reached to knot a wire. Even through their gloves, Bianca felt a spark of connection that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. Wilbert's movements faltered for just a moment, and she saw a flush climb above his beard that wasn't entirely from exertion. The last light was fading as they returned to the cabin. Bianca set about preparing their evening meal while Wilbert brought in more firewood. The familiar routine felt comfortable now, like a well-worn quilt. Over bowls of humble beans and cornbread, Bianca found herself thinking about how much had changed since that desperate night in the church. A chuckle escaped before she could stop it. Wilbert looked up, questioning. "Something amusing." "Just remembering that night," she said, surprising herself with how the memory's sting had faded. "I must have looked quite a sight, standing up in front of everyone like that." A slow smile spread across Wilbert's face, softening his stern features. "Reckon you gave Preacher Jenkins quite a turn. Never seen him so flustered." "His face turned redder than a summer tomato," Bianca agreed, giggling now. And poor Mrs. Whitaker nearly fell off her pew. "Don't forget old Thompson dropping his pipe," Wilbert added, his deep voice warming with humor. "Rolled right under Widow Spencer's skirts." They both laughed then, the sound filling the cabin with unexpected joy. Bianca marveled at how what had been her deepest shame was transforming into something they could share with mirth rather than pain. As their laughter settled into comfortable silence, Bianca studied the man across the table. His massive hands cradled his cup with surprising gentleness, and firelight played across the scars that had once frightened her. Now she saw them differently, marks of a heart brave enough to help a lost child, to defend a desperate woman, to build a life of quiet honor in a harsh land. Outside, the wind sang through pine branches and coyotes called to the rising moon. But inside the cabin, warmth and understanding grew between two souls who had found each other in the most unexpected way. The late March sun worked its magic on the mountain valley, turning crusty snowdrifts into rivulets that trickled down to feed the swelling creek. Patches of dark earth emerged like islands in the white landscape, promising the return of spring. Inside the cabin, Bianca stood at the window, watching winter's grip slowly loosen on the land. "Reckon it's time," Wilbert said behind her, his deep voice thoughtful. "Ground'll be soft enough to break soon." They spent the morning in the barn, checking harnesses and readying the heavy draft horses. Bianca learned the proper way to inspect leather for wear, her fingers growing confident as she worked the buckles and straps. The horses' breath made clouds in the cool air as Wilbert led them out, their hooves clopping against the hard-packed earth of the barn floor. The plow waited in the shed, its metal blade dulled by seasons of use. Together they hitched the team, Wilbert's sure hands guiding Bianca through each step. The horses stamped and shifted, eager to work after months of relative idleness. "Easy there, boys," Wilbert murmured, patting their broad flanks. He turned to Bianca. "Ready?" She nodded, drawing her shawl tighter against the morning chill. They walked together to the south field where the snow had melted fastest, leaving the ground dark and damp. Wilbert took position behind the plow, his massive frame balanced easily despite the horse's pulling strength. The blade bit into the earth with a satisfying crunch, and the first furrow opened like a black ribbon across the field. Bianca walked alongside, clearing stones from the plow's path. The physical labor warmed her, and without thinking she began to hum. The melody of Amazing Grace rose naturally to her lips, soft at first, then stronger as she found her voice. The words floated across the freshly turned soil. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. That saved a wretch like me. She sang the way she had in her mother's kitchen years ago, clear and unpretentious. Other hymns followed, their familiar verses carrying memories of church suppers and Sunday mornings. The horse's steady pace kept time as she moved through What a Friend We Have in Jesus and Rock of Ages. When she started It Is Well With My Soul, she noticed Wilbert had stopped the team. He stood motionless behind the plow, his face turned toward her with an expression she'd never seen before. Something raw and wondering, as if her simple songs had touched a place long sealed away. "Don't stop," he said roughly. "Please." So she sang on, her voice growing stronger with each verse. The morning sun climbed higher, warming their backs as they worked. By noon, they had broken ground for the kitchen garden and started on the larger field where corn would grow. They broke for a simple meal of bread and cheese, sitting on a fallen log at the field's edge. The horses grazed nearby, steam rising from their backs in the spring air. Bianca's muscles ached pleasantly from the morning's work, and she felt a deep satisfaction in their shared labor. "My mother used to sing those hymns," she said after a while, breaking the comfortable silence. "When I was little, she'd sing while kneading bread or hanging wash. Said it was like praying twice, once with words and once with music." Wilbert nodded slowly. "Been a long time since I heard hymns proper," he admitted, Stopped going to church after. His hand rose unconsciously to touch the scars on his face. After the war. Felt too much anger in my heart. Weren't right, bringing that into God's house? Bianca studied his profile, seeing past the marks of battle to the pain beneath. But you kept your Bible close, she said softly. Aye. He drew a deep breath. Prayed every night these past years, asking the Lord to take away the bitterness, to help me forgive. Everything. The war, the woman who... He stopped, but Bianca knew he meant the letters she'd found, the ones from the woman who'd abandoned him. The sun slipped behind a cloud, casting cool shadows across the field. A late winter bird called from the forest edge. Bianca gathered her courage and reached across the space between them, laying her hand on his arm. Maybe, she said carefully. Your answer was a stubborn girl who wouldn't take no. Wilbert turned to look at her then, his eyes intense. Maybe, he agreed, his voice barely above a whisper, though I reckon she's more angel than stubborn. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spring ice. Then, with infinite gentleness, Wilbert raised his hand to cup her cheek. His palm was rough from work, but his touch was tender as he drew her closer. Their first kiss was awkward and sweet, both of them unsure but yearning. Bianca felt the scratch of his beard, the warmth of his breath, the trembling of his hand against her face. When they parted, she kept her eyes closed for a moment, holding the sensation close to her heart. Lord above, Wilbert murmured, resting his forehead against hers. Never thought I'd find such grace. They finished the days plowing in a glow of shy happiness, stealing glances at each other across the furrows. The afternoon light turned golden, casting long shadows across the newly turned earth. As they unharnessed the horses and led them back to the barn, their hands found excuses to touch, passing tools, steadying steps, brushing away bits of hay. That evening, they sat before the fire, sharing fresh bread and coffee. The flames painted everything in warm shades of amber and gold, softening edges and shadows. Bianca had pulled her chair closer to Wilbert's, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. Been thinking, he said after a while, his deep voice gentle in the fire-lit quiet. About how the good book says God works in mysterious ways. Bianca smiled, remembering her bold declaration in the church that winter night. Like bringing together two lonely souls in the middle of a snowstorm? Exactly that. He reached for her hand, engulfing it in his larger one. Reckon he knew what he was about, even when we didn't? He usually does, Bianca agreed softly. She leaned her head against Wilbert's shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him. Though I admit, that night in church I was running more on desperation than faith. Takes courage to act on either one, he said, pressing a kiss to her hair. You had both. They sat together until the fire burned low, talking quietly of spring planting and summer hopes, of fence mending and garden planning. When the clock struck 9, they reluctantly parted for their separate rooms, but something had shifted between them. The air seemed charged with possibility, with the promise of a future unfolding like spring buds after winter's long sleep. Bianca lay in her bed, listening to Wilbert's heavy footsteps in the next room. She touched her lips, still feeling the echo of their kiss, and smiled in the darkness. Outside, the wind whispered through pine boughs, and somewhere in the distance, a lone coyote called to the rising moon. But inside her heart, she felt only warmth and certainty, knowing that God had indeed worked his mysterious way, knitting together two wounded hearts into something new and beautiful. The night settled around the cabin like a gentle hand, and in separate rooms, both Bianca and Wilbert offered up prayers of gratitude for the gift they had found in each other. Spring was coming to the mountain valley, bringing with it the promise of new life and the hope of a family truly begun. Spring had transformed the valley into a tapestry of vibrant greens. The mountainsides, once stark with winter's grip, now burst with new pine needles and unfurling leaves. In the weeks since their first kiss, Bianca and Wilbert had worked side by side to coax life from the thawing earth. Bianca stood at the edge of their small garden, surveying the neat rows with pride. Her hands, once soft from indoor work, now bore calluses from the wooden hoe handle. She touched a tender pea shoot, marveling at how the tiny seed she'd planted had pushed through the soil toward sunlight. Potato plants formed sturdy green mounds in another section, their leaves deep and promising. "Lord willing, we'll have fresh vegetables come summer," she said to herself, wiping sweat from her brow. The afternoon sun warmed her shoulders through her cotton dress, and a gentle breeze carried the sweet scent of wild roses from the nearby meadow. Inside the cabin, she began preparing their evening meal. The routine had become familiar now, stoking the cook stove, kneading fresh bread, stirring the bean pot that simmered with a ham bone. Her movements were sure and practiced, no longer tentative as they had been in those first uncertain days. Wilbert returned from checking the fence lines just as she was setting the table. He paused in the doorway, watching her move about the kitchen with quiet appreciation. His massive frame filled the entrance, but his presence no longer intimidated her. Instead, it brought a warmth to her chest and a flutter to her heart. "Smells mighty fine in here," he said, hanging his hat on its peg. He washed his hands at the basin, then reached into his coat pocket. "Got something for you?" Bianca turned from the stove, curious. In his large hands was a wooden spoon, carefully carved from pale pine. The handle was smooth as silk, decorated with delicate leaves that wound their way down to the bowl. She could see the hours of patient work in every detail. "Been working on it during evenings," Wilbert explained, his voice gruff with emotion. "Thought you might like something pretty for your kitchen." Bianca took the spoon with trembling fingers. She traced the carved leaves, feeling the love worked into every line. Tears pricked at her eyes as she clutched it to her chest like a precious jewel. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you." They sat down to supper, the new spoon taking pride of place beside Bianca's plate. The meal was simple, beans, cornbread, and the last of winter's preserved apples, but shared with gentle glances and soft smiles that spoke volumes. As they finished eating, rain began to patter against the cabin's roof. The sound was soothing, a spring lullaby that filled the comfortable silence between them. Bianca's heart thundered in her chest as she gathered her courage. They were married in law, but not yet in truth. The time had come to change that. After the dishes were dried and put away, Bianca went to her room. She changed into her best nightgown, the one with tiny flowers embroidered at the collar. Her hands shook as she brushed her long hair until it shone in the lamplight. The floorboards creaked softly under her feet as she made her way down the short hallway to Wilbert's door. She hesitated for a moment, then knocked gently. "Come in," his deep voice answered. Wilbert sat on the edge of his bed, still fully dressed except for his boots. His eyes widened when he saw her, understanding dawning in his expression. "Bianca," he breathed her name like a prayer. She stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. The rain drummed steadily on the roof, creating a cocoon of privacy around them. "I'm ready," she said softly, "to truly be your wife." He stood slowly, moving toward her with the careful grace that always surprised her in such a large man. His hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "You're sure?" he asked, his voice tender. "There's no rush if you're not ready." Bianca leaned into his touch. "I'm sure," she whispered. "I want to be with you, Wilbert. In every way." Their first kiss that night was different from the others they'd shared, deeper, filled with longing and promise. Wilbert's hands trembled as he held her, treating her like something precious and rare. Bianca helped him with the buttons of his shirt, her fingers discovering the map of scars that crossed his chest. She kissed each one, showing him that nothing about him could frighten or repel her. Their union was gentle and uncertain at first, both of them learning each other with tender patience. Wilbert whispered words of love and reassurance, guiding her through the initial discomfort until pleasure replaced pain. The rain provided a steady rhythm to their discovery of each other, washing away the last barriers between them. "You're my gift, Bianca," Wilbert murmured against her hair as they lay entwined. "The answer to every prayer I was afraid to speak." She pressed closer to him, feeling the strong beat of his heart against her cheek. "And you're mine," she answered. "My mountain, my shelter, my home." They drifted to sleep in each other's arms as the spring rain blessed the valley. Dawn found them still wrapped together, Bianca's head tucked under Wilbert's chin, their hands clasped even in sleep. The first rays of sunshine peeked through the window, painting the room in soft gold. When they finally rose to face the day, words seemed unnecessary. They moved around each other in the kitchen, exchanging shy smiles and gentle touches as they prepared breakfast. The cabin felt different somehow, warmer, more alive with the love they'd shared. Wilbert paused in the doorway before heading out to his morning chores. He drew Bianca close for a lingering kiss that held all the tenderness of the night before. "I love you," he said simply, the words carrying the weight of absolute truth. "I love you too," she replied, her heart so full it felt like bursting. Outside, meadowlarks welcomed the morning with joyful songs. Their trills seemed to echo the happiness in Bianca's heart as she watched Wilbert cross the yard to the barn. The garden sparkled with raindrops from the night before, each one catching the sun like a tiny diamond. She touched the carved wooden spoon, now hanging proudly on the wall, and smiled. This was what she'd prayed for all those lonely years, not just a husband or a home, but a love that could transform two wounded souls into something whole and beautiful. The morning light filled the cabin with warmth as Bianca began her daily tasks, humming hymns of gratitude. Each domestic chore felt like a blessing now, a thread in the tapestry of the life she and Wilbert were weaving together. Outside, spring continued to paint the valley in ever deeper shades of green, promising a future as bright as the love growing between them. Summer swept across the valley like a golden tide. The days stretched long and warm, filled with the steady rhythm of work and the deepening bond between Wilbert and Bianca. Their homestead hummed with activity as they labored side by side, turning dreams into reality, one project at a time. One bright morning, Wilbert laid out lumber for their newest endeavor, a chicken coop to house their growing flock. Bianca watched in admiration as his strong hands measured and marked the wood with precision. The saw's rhythmic bite filled the air with the scent of fresh-cut pine. "Hand me those nails, would you?" Wilbert asked, wiping sweat from his brow. Bianca passed him the tin can, their fingers brushing. These small touches still sent warmth through her, even after months of marriage. "I reckon our hens will be mighty pleased," she said, holding a board steady as he hammered. "No more foxes getting at them." The morning passed in comfortable industry. Bianca had grown stronger since winter, her movements more confident as she helped lift and position the wooden frames. By midday, the coop's skeleton stood proud against the summer sky. Later that week, they turned their attention to the cabin's roof. Years of mountain winters had taken their toll on the shingles. Together they climbed the ladder, Wilbert's steady hand at Bianca's back, ensuring her safety. "Never thought I'd see the day," he chuckled, passing her a bundle of shingles. "My wife up here, fixing roof tiles like she was born to it." Bianca smiled, remembering how she'd once feared heights. "Amazing what love makes possible," she replied, carefully nailing down another row. The sun beat down as they worked, but neither complained. Each repair strengthened not just their home, but their partnership. Bianca's heart swelled with pride as she watched Wilbert teach her the proper way to overlap the shingles, his patience never wavering. As the afternoon cooled, they made their way to Tiana's settlement. The Apache woman's dwelling sat nestled against the foothills, smoke rising from her cooking fire. She greeted them with quiet dignity, gesturing for them to sit beneath the shade of a spreading oak. "I have watched you through the seasons," Tiana said, her dark eyes wise and knowing. "You have grown strong together, like young trees that twine as they reach for the sky." She disappeared into her dwelling and returned with something wrapped in soft deerskin. "For you, sister," she said to Bianca, presenting the bundle. Bianca unwrapped it carefully, gasping at what lay within. A shawl, woven in intricate patterns of deep blue and earth brown, its fringe dancing with tiny shell beads that caught the light. "This pattern speaks of family," Tiana explained, running her fingers along the design. "You are now part of this land's story, as much as the mountains themselves." Tears welled in Bianca's eyes as she draped the shawl around her shoulders. The weight of it felt like an embrace, a blessing from both Tiana and the land itself. Wilbert watched with quiet pride as the two women embraced, the barriers of culture and prejudice dissolved by genuine acceptance. "Thank you," Bianca whispered, touching the delicate beadwork. "I never dreamed I'd find such friendship here." They shared a meal of corn cakes and wild honey, talking of gardens and weather and the ways of healing. As the sun began to sink, they bid Tiana farewell, their hearts full of gratitude for the bonds of chosen family. The following week found them in town for supplies. The mercantile's shelves were well stocked with summer goods, and Bianca selected seeds for fall planting, while Wilbert arranged for feed delivery. The whispers that had once followed them had largely died away, replaced by grudging respect for their obvious prosperity. Their contentment, however, shattered upon their return home. The sight stopped them cold at the edge of their meadow. Wooden stakes, topped with bright red flags, marched across their land in an ugly line. The survey markers cut through their best grazing ground, a wound across the peaceful valley. Wilbert's face darkened like a thunderhead. Without a word, he swung down from his horse and strode to the nearest stake. His massive hands wrapped around the wood, muscles bunching as he wrenched it from the earth with a sound like tearing fabric. "Railroad agents," he growled, snapping the stake across his knee, "trespassing where they ain't welcome." Bianca dismounted, her new shawl billowing in the warm breeze as she hurried to his side. Her heart pounded with fear, but she forced her voice to remain steady. "When did they come? How dare they?" "While we were in town," Wilbert said, moving to the next stake. One by one, he tore them from the ground, his fury evident in every movement. "Sneaking around like thieves, which is what they are." Bianca helped gather the broken stakes into a pile, her hands trembling but determined. The red flags seemed to mock them, bright as blood against the summer green. "What will we do?" she asked. Wilbert straightened, his massive frame casting a long shadow in the evening light. "What we've always done. Stand our ground." "We'll fight this together," Bianca declared, reaching for his hand. Her voice grew stronger as she continued, "This is our home, our land. They can't just take it." Wilbert's fingers tightened around hers, rough with calluses but gentle as always. "No, they can't," he agreed, his tone softening as he looked at her. "Not while we draw breath." As darkness settled over the valley, they built a fire in their clearing. Fireflies began to dance among the trees, their light twinkling like earthbound stars. The pile of broken survey stakes lay ready for burning, a defiant statement against those who would steal their dreams. Bianca leaned against Wilbert's chest as they sat before the flames, his arms wrapped protectively around her. The warmth of the fire couldn't quite chase away the chill of fear that had settled in their hearts. Tomorrow's troubles loomed large, but for now they drew strength from each other's presence. Remember when I first came here? Bianca asked softly, watching the fireflies weave through the darkness. I was so afraid, but something in my heart knew this was where I belonged. Wilbert's chest rumbled with a deep sigh. God gave me more than I deserved that day, he said, pressing a kiss to her hair. And I aim to protect what he's blessed us with. They held each other close as the fire burned low, the night alive with cricket song and the gentle whisper of wind through pine needles. The valley stretched around them, a sanctuary they had built together, now threatened by forces that valued profit over people. The fireflies continued their dance, oblivious to human concerns, their brief lights a reminder that even in darkness, hope persisted. Bianca touched the soft weave of Tiana's shawl, drawing comfort from its connection to the land and the people who had become her true family. As the last embers glowed, neither spoke of their fears for tomorrow. Instead, they shared the quiet strength of their love, forged in winter's trials and tempered by summer's joy. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had faced everything else, together. Dawn painted the mountain peaks in soft gold as Bianca watched Wilbert saddle his horse. The morning air held a bitter chill despite summer's warmth, matching the cold knot of fear in her stomach. Wilbert's jaw was set in grim determination as he checked the cinch one final time. You don't have to go, Bianca said softly, wringing her apron between worried hands. We could send word to the sheriff instead. Wilbert shook his head, his broad shoulders tense. Can't hide behind the law when those surveyors are breaking it themselves. A man's got to stand up sometime. He turned to her, his scarred face softening as he took in her concern. Gently, he placed his massive hands on her shoulders. I'll be back before sunset. Just going to have words with them. Nothing more. Bianca nodded, fighting back tears as she straightened his collar. Promise me you'll be careful. Those railroad men, they're not known for fighting fair. I promise, he said, pulling her close for a moment. His embrace was warm and solid, smelling of leather and pine. Then he mounted up, the horse shifting beneath his weight. Keep the chickens fed, he added with a small smile, trying to lighten her mood. Bianca watched until horse and rider disappeared down the mountain trail, her heart heavy with unspoken fears. The morning stretched before her, empty and uncertain. She threw herself into chores, trying to keep her mind occupied. The chickens clucked around her feet as she scattered feed, their simple contentment a stark contrast to her growing anxiety. She weeded the garden, gathered eggs, and swept the cabin floor, all the while straining her ears for approaching hoofbeats. By midday, the sun beat down mercilessly. Bianca paused in her work, wiping sweat from her brow as she gazed down the valley. No sign of Wilbert. She whispered prayers as she worked, her lips moving silently with each stroke of the butter churn, each turn of the spinning wheel. Lord, keep him safe, she murmured, watching as afternoon shadows began to lengthen across the yard. Bring him home to me. The chickens had already begun settling in for the night when she finally heard a horse approaching. Relief flooded through her until she saw how the rider slumped in the saddle. Wilbert, she cried, running to meet him as he struggled to dismount. His face was a mask of blood and dirt, one eye swollen shut. He staggered as his boots hit the ground, and Bianca rushed to support him. Inside, he gasped, leaning heavily on her shoulder. Together they made their slow way to the cabin, where he collapsed into a chair by the fire. In the lamplight, his injuries looked even worse. Bianca's hands shook as she gathered clean cloths and their precious bottle of witch hazel. What happened? She asked, gently beginning to clean his face. A deep cut above his eyebrow still oozed blood. Wilbert winced at her touch but held still. Went to the survey office, proper-like, he said, his words slightly slurred by his swollen lip. Found that Agent Briggs and tried to talk sense. Next thing I know, I'm being dragged into an alley by 3 of his men. Tears rolled down Bianca's cheeks as she worked, revealing more bruises beneath the dirt and blood. "They ambushed you?" He nodded slightly, then groaned at the movement. "Beat me good and proper, but that ain't the worst of it." His uninjured eye met hers, dark with worry. "Deputy Knox showed up right as I got free. Claims I attacked them first. Says he's got witnesses who'll swear to it." Bianca's hands stilled. "But that's a lie." "Truth don't matter much to men like that," Wilbert said grimly. "Knox is in Briggs's pocket, sure as sunrise. Says he'll be coming for me tomorrow with arrest papers." A sob caught in Bianca's throat as she pressed a cool cloth to his swollen eye. "We have to do something. We can't let them take you." "Ain't much choice, love." Wilbert caught her trembling hand in his. "If I resist arrest, they'll have cause to shoot me down right here. Best face it legal-like. Try to prove my innocence proper." Through the long night, Bianca tended his wounds, her heart breaking with each pained breath he took. She helped him to bed, but couldn't bring herself to sleep, keeping vigil by the window instead. The moon crossed the sky, stars wheeled overhead, and still she sat, praying for a miracle that didn't come. First light was just breaking when she heard them, horses approaching, many of them. Bianca rushed to wake Wilbert, though he was already struggling to sit up. "They're here," she whispered, helping him dress with gentle hands. His face was a mass of purple bruises in the dim light. The pound of fists on their door made them both jump. "Wilbert, red!" Deputy Knox's voice rang out. "Come out, peaceful-like. You're under arrest for assault and battery." Wilbert straightened his shoulders despite the pain, touching Bianca's cheek once before moving to the door. "Coming out," he called. "No need for shooting." Bianca followed him onto the porch, gasping at the sight of 6 armed men sitting their horses in the yard. Deputy Knox stood at their head, his badge gleaming in the dawn light. Behind him, she recognized Samuel Briggs, the railroad agent, looking smug despite his carefully arranged expression of concern. "Hands where we can see them, Red," Knox ordered, his hand hovering near his pistol. Wilbert raised his hand slowly, and Bianca saw how it cost him, every movement pulling at his injured ribs. "No need for all this show, Deputy. I'll come peaceful." 2 men dismounted and approached with manacles. Bianca couldn't hold back any longer. She threw herself forward, wrapping her arms around Wilbert's waist. "You can't take him! Look what they did to him! He's the victim here!" "Ma'am," Knox said coldly, "your husband assaulted 3 upstanding citizens yesterday. We have witnesses. Now stand aside." "Lies!" Bianca cried, clinging tighter as the men tried to pull her away. "They ambushed him. They're trying to steal our land." Wilbert's voice rumbled above her head. "Bianca, love, let go now. Don't make this harder." "No!" She looked up at him through tears, seeing the pain and love mingled in his good eye. "I won't let them do this." Gently but firmly, Wilbert unwrapped her arms from his waist. He held her hands between his massive ones, his gaze intense. "Be strong," he whispered. "Remember who you are, the brave woman who stood up in church that winter night. I need that courage now." The men seized his arms, shackling his wrists. Bianca watched helplessly as they led him to a waiting horse. Just before they helped him mount, Wilbert turned back to her one last time, his eyes locked on hers with fierce love and determination. "I'll not let them win," Bianca whispered, her voice carrying on the morning air. "I swear it." She stood on the porch, Tayana's shawl clutched around her shoulders as the group rode away. Wilbert's broad back was straight despite his injuries, his head held high. Bianca watched until they disappeared around the bend, taking her heart with them. The morning sun climbed higher, warming the empty yard. A chicken pecked near her feet, unaware that its world had changed. Bianca stared down the mountain trail, her tears finally dry as determination began to replace her despair. "I'll not let them win," she repeated, stronger now. The words echoed across the valley like a vow. The morning after Wilbert's arrest, Bianca stood in the doorway of their cabin, the silence pressing against her ears like a physical weight. The home that had grown so warm with shared laughter now felt hollow, each empty corner an ache in her heart. She forced herself to move. The animals wouldn't feed themselves. Outside, the spring air carried a bitter chill despite the strengthening sun. Bianca's feet dragged as she made her way to the chicken coop, where the hens clucked expectantly. "At least you still need me," she whispered, scattering feed with trembling hands. The familiar motion brought little comfort, but she pressed on. Wilbert had taught her well the importance of routine, of caring for the land and its creatures no matter what troubles came. In the barn, she fought tears while forking hay to the horses. The empty stall where Wilbert's mount should stand made her throat tight. Even the tools seemed to mock her, his heavy axe leaning against the wall, his work gloves draped over a fence post, waiting for hands that wouldn't return today. By mid-morning, dark thoughts threatened to overwhelm her. Bianca found herself standing in the yard, basket forgotten at her feet, staring blindly at the mountain trail where they'd taken him. The urge to collapse, to give in to despair, pulled at her like quicksand. A shadow fell across the yard. Bianca turned to find Tiana approaching, her face lined with concern. The Apache woman carried a cloth-wrapped bundle, steam rising from its folds. "You have not eaten," Tiana said simply, pressing the warm package into Bianca's hands. The rich smell of corn cakes and dried meat brought sudden tears to Bianca's eyes. "I can't," she started to refuse, but Tiana's firm grip on her arm stopped her. "Come, sit with me." Tiana led her to the porch steps, settling beside her with quiet grace. "Eat, then we will talk." The first bite broke something in Bianca. She hadn't realized how hungry she was, how the shock had stolen her appetite. As she ate, Tiana's presence beside her offered silent comfort. "I don't know what to do," Bianca finally whispered, crumpling the empty cloth in her lap. "They took him on lies." "How can I fight that?" Tiana's dark eyes held wisdom earned through generations of struggle. "You stand," she said simply. "You stand, and you show them your strength. My people know sometimes the strongest weapon is refusing to break." "But I'm already broken," Bianca admitted, her voice catching. "I've always been the one they mock, the one they—" "No!" Tiana's voice was sharp. "You are Wilbert's chosen wife." The woman brave enough to claim him before all. Remember that strength. Her hand squeezed Bianca's shoulder. "My son lives because of your husband's courage. Now you must show yours." That evening, after Tiana left, Bianca moved through the cabin's quiet rooms with new purpose. She cleaned Wilbert's wounds from his shirt, folded his clothes with reverent hands, and tidied their home as if he might walk through the door at any moment. Sunday dawned, clear and cold. Bianca dressed carefully in her best dress, the one Wilbert had praised for matching her eyes. Her hands shook as she pinned her hair, but she forced them steady. She would not hide. The walk to church seemed longer without Wilbert's strong presence beside her. As she approached the white-painted building, whispers rippled through the gathering congregation. She heard the words clearly enough. "Poor foolish girl," and "that murderous mountain man's woman." Bianca lifted her chin, remembering Tiana's words about standing strong. She walked up the steps, past the muttering women and smirking men, and took her usual seat. The empty space beside her screamed Wilbert's absence. The service began, but Bianca barely heard the hymns or scripture readings. Her heart pounded with growing anger as she caught more whispered comments, cruel jokes about her marriage. "Not even properly wed," someone hissed behind her. "Just some desperate arrangement." "Probably glad to be rid of him," another voice added. "What decent woman would want that scarred giant?" Something snapped inside Bianca. She surged to her feet in the middle of the sermon, tears streaming down her face. The preacher's words stuttered to a halt as she turned to face the congregation. "I begged to be loved," she cried out, her voice ringing in the sudden silence. "I stood right here and asked for a chance at happiness. And Wilbert did not shame me." Her chest heaved with sobs, but she forced the words out. "He gave me dignity when you all laughed. He gave me a home when you mocked. He gave me love when you said I deserved none." The church sat frozen, faces shocked at her outburst. Bianca's tears fell freely now, but she stood straighter, stronger. "Now you shame me for standing by him, for being faithful to my husband?" Her voice broke on the word husband, but she pushed on. "You call yourselves Christians, but you rejoice in our pain. You believe lies because they're easier than seeing the truth, that Wilbert is a good man, and I am proud to be his wife." She sank back onto the hard bench, spent. The silence stretched, broken only by her quiet sobs. Then, remarkably, something shifted in the air. Mrs. Peterson, the baker's wife, moved to sit beside her, pressing a clean handkerchief into her hands. Old Mr. Thompson cleared his throat and muttered, "Girl's got spirit, speaking truth like that." After the service, a few townspeople approached her. Sarah Miller, who had laughed loudest at the matching ceremony, touched Bianca's arm. "We'll pray for your husband's release," she said softly. Maybe we were too quick to judge." Bianca walked home alone, but she felt different, stronger, more certain of her path. The cabin's emptiness still hurt, but now it fired her determination instead of feeding her despair. That evening, she knelt beside Wilbert's chair, running her fingers over the worn armrests where his hands had rested so often. The firelight threw dancing shadows on the walls as she spoke aloud, her voice firm despite her tears. "I will fight for you," she promised, "however long it takes, whatever I must do. You gave me a home, gave me love when no one else would. Now I'll give you my strength." She pressed her forehead against the smooth wood. "God help me, I will not let them win." The cabin creaked softly in the gathering dark, as if bearing witness to her vow. Outside, a whippoorwill called, its lonely song echoing across the valley. But Bianca's heart felt steadier, her purpose clear at last. She would face whatever came next, standing tall like the mountain woman she had become. Dawn painted the mountains gold as Bianca hitched the wagon alone. Her hands remembered Wilbert's patient teachings, though the leather straps felt heavier without him. The mare nickered softly as Bianca checked the harness one final time. "We're going to bring him home," she whispered, patting the horse's warm neck. "God willing." The road into Fairchance stretched before her, rutted from spring rains. Bianca had spent 3 sleepless nights planning this journey, gathering her courage. The slight swell of her belly, still hidden beneath her dress, gave her strength. She wasn't fighting just for Wilbert anymore. The blacksmith's forge came alive early, sparks dancing in the dim morning light. Tom Henderson looked up as Bianca's wagon approached, his weathered face creasing with concern. He set aside his hammer as she climbed down. "Mrs. Red," he said quietly, using her married name with deliberate respect. "What brings you to town so early?" Bianca squared her shoulders. "Truth, Mr. Henderson. I need to know what you saw that day the railroad men came through." The blacksmith's eyes darted around the empty street. He gestured her closer to the forge, where the rhythmic striking of metal would cover their words. "I shouldn't speak of it," he began, but Bianca cut him off. "My husband sits in jail on false charges, please." Henderson's hands worked restlessly at his leather apron. 3 of them came through late that evening. Railroad agent Briggs and his men. They were drinking, talking loud. He paused, stoking the forge. "Heard them planning how to run your man off that land. Briggs said he'd file whatever papers needed doing, true or not." Bianca's heart pounded. "You'd testify to that?" Henderson looked away. "Those railroad men, they carry weight with the bank." "My loans." "Please," Bianca whispered, "for the truth." The blacksmith studied her face for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. "Aye, for truth's sake, and because your Wilberts always dealt fair with me." Hope flickered in Bianca's chest as she thanked him. One piece of evidence secured. She urged the wagon toward her next stop, the telegraph office. Young Jimmy Peters, the clerk, jumped when she entered. His face flushed red as he stammered a greeting. "I know you were working late 3 weeks ago," Bianca said softly. "The night Agent Briggs sent those telegrams." Jimmy's fingers twisted nervously. "I'm not supposed to discuss official business." "Jimmy," Bianca leaned forward, "you know what they're doing isn't right." The clerk glanced at the door, then spoke in a rush. He sent messages to the railroad office in Denver, asking them to backdate land claim papers. His voice dropped lower. "I saw him writing letters, too, changing dates, forging signatures. Said anyone who questioned it would regret it." Bianca touched his hand gently. "Would you be willing to tell others what you saw?" Jimmy hesitated, then straightened his thin shoulders. "My pa always said evil wins when good folks stay quiet. I'll speak up." By midday, Bianca's head spun with testimonies and promises. The livery stable owner who'd overheard threats, a ranch hand who'd seen railroad men planting those survey stakes in the dark. Each piece added weight to her case. A familiar figure appeared beside her wagon as she prepared to leave, Tiana wrapped in her traditional shawl. "You gather weapons of truth," the Apache woman said, her dark eyes knowing. "Let me walk with you. Show them we stand together." Bianca's throat tightened with gratitude. "The town meeting's tonight. They won't expect us both." "Good." Tiana's smile held steel. "Let them see strength comes in many forms." That evening, Bianca changed into her best dress, the fabric straining slightly at her waist. Her hands trembled as she pinned her hair, but her eyes in the mirror showed determination. Tiana waited outside with quiet dignity. The town hall buzzed with voices as they entered. Heads turned, conversations stuttering to silence at the sight of them. The large white woman and the Apache, walking shoulder to shoulder. They took seats near the front, ignoring the whispers. Mayor Collins called the meeting to order, discussing routine matters first. When he opened the floor for new business, Bianca stood before her, courage could falter. Tiana rose beside her, a steady presence. "I come before you seeking justice," Bianca began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. "My husband sits in jail on false charges, while railroad men steal our land with forged papers." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Agent Briggs stood up, his face darkening. "Now see here." "No, you see here." Bianca's voice grew stronger. "I have witnesses. Good people who saw your schemes and threats, who watched you forge documents and plant false evidence." The blacksmith stood up. "It's true. I heard them plotting." Jimmy Peters rose next, then others, one by one. Those who'd promised to speak added their testimony. The mood in the hall shifted as the truth emerged. Agent Briggs tried to interrupt, but Bianca wasn't finished. She drew herself up to her full height, one hand pressing against her belly. "I may be large and plain," she declared, her voice ringing with conviction, "but I am Wilbert Redd's wife, and I carry his child. You will not steal what God gave us." Gasps echoed through the hall. Women's hands flew to their mouths. Even the mayor looked shocked. "She's lying," Briggs sneered. "Who'd believe that mountain savage would—" "Shame on you!" Old Mrs. Watson's voice cracked like a whip. She stood, her gray head held high. "I remember when my Thomas and I homesteaded here. No one thought we'd survive neither. But God gives strength to those who need it." She turned to the crowd. "Look at this brave girl, fighting for her man, carrying his babe. Will we let railroad money matter more than justice?" Other women began standing, wives who'd survived harsh winters, widows who'd fought to keep their land. Their voices joined together, demanding truth be heard. Mayor Collins raised his hands for quiet. "These are serious accusations, Mrs. Redd. We'll need to investigate properly." "Then investigate," Bianca said firmly. "Send telegrams to Denver. Check those land claims, but free my husband while you do." Tiana stepped forward, her presence commanding attention. "My people know this woman speaks truth. We have watched Wilbert Red work his land with honor. Now his wife shows the same courage." The meeting erupted into heated discussion. Agent Briggs stormed out, his face mottled with rage. But Bianca saw the tide turning in the nodding heads, the sympathetic glances, the determined faces of townsfolk who'd chosen to stand for right. As darkness fell outside, women gathered around Bianca. Mrs. Watson patted her hand. "You rest now, dear. We'll help you fight this battle." Walking home under the stars, Tiana beside her, Bianca felt hope blooming like spring flowers after winter's frost. The wagon swayed gently as she held the reins, remembering Wilbert's teachings. "You have made yourself heard," Tiana said softly. "Now they will listen." "Thank you," Bianca whispered, "for standing with me." "We are family now," Tiana replied simply, "and family stands together." In town behind them, lanterns glowed in windows as neighbors gathered to talk. The story of Bianca's courage spread from house to house, changing hearts with each telling. By morning, more voices would join the call for justice. The mountain woman who'd once been mocked had shown them all the true meaning of strength. Word spread through Fairchance like wildfire. By midnight, lanterns bobbed through the streets as townspeople gathered in clusters, sharing what they had learned at the meeting. The revelation of Bianca's pregnancy, coupled with the evidence of the railroad's schemes, sparked a wave of indignation that could not be contained. Before sunrise, Reverend Green stood on the sheriff's wooden porch, his thin frame wrapped against the morning chill. Behind him, a dozen of the town's most respected men waited solemnly. The sheriff opened his door, surprise flickering across his weathered face at the sight of so many visitors at this early hour. "Sheriff Matthews," the preacher's soft voice carried steel beneath its gentleness, "we've come about Wilbert Red." "This ain't regular visiting hours," the sheriff protested, but his eyes shifted uneasily between the assembled faces. "No, sir, it ain't," agreed Thomas Henderson, the blacksmith. His massive arms were crossed over his chest. "But neither is jailing an innocent man on forged charges." The sheriff's shoulders sagged. He gestured them inside, where lamplight cast long shadows across his desk. From a drawer, he withdrew a stack of papers, handling them like they might bite. "Found these in Agent Briggs' office last night," he admitted. "After all that commotion at the meeting, I did some looking." He spread the letters across his desk. Dates changed, signatures that don't match their originals. Even telegrams ordering backdated claims. Reverend Green studied the evidence, his face grave. "The Lord sees all deception, Sheriff. What matters now is making it right." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Reckon you're right about that." He took his keys from their hook. "Come along, then." Dawn was just breaking as they reached the jail cells. Wilbert sat on his narrow cot, his huge frame making the space seem even smaller. His face was bruised, but his eyes lit with hope at the sound of keys turning in the lock. "You're free to go, Red," the sheriff announced. "Seems there's been a mistake." Wilbert stood carefully, his movements stiff from confinement. Before he could take 2 steps, running footsteps echoed outside. Bianca burst through the door, her face flushed from her rush through the morning air. She didn't hesitate. With a cry that held all her fear and longing, she threw herself into Wilbert's arms, nearly knocking him back. Her arms wrapped around his neck as he lifted her, holding her close despite his injuries. "I kept my promise," she whispered against his ear, tears flowing freely. "I wouldn't let them win." Wilbert's scarred face was wet with his own tears as he drew back to look at her. "You've done more than keep a promise," he answered hoarsely. "You gave me back life itself." The townsman turned away, giving the couple privacy in their reunion. Outside, the sun crested the mountains, painting the sky in shades of victory. Wilbert and Bianca emerged hand in hand, climbing into their wagon together. As they rode toward home, the church bells began to toll, their joyous pealing echoing across the valley. The sound rang with triumph, announcing to all that justice had prevailed and love had conquered fear. The afternoon sun warmed the homestead as wagons rolled up the muddy path. Neighbors who had stood silent for months now came bearing tools and willing hands. Thomas Henderson, the blacksmith, led a team of men to repair the broken fence posts. Women from church carried baskets laden with fresh bread and preserves. Tiana appeared with her family, bringing earthen pots of fragrant stew and healing herbs for Wilbert's bruises. Her children scattered to help gather eggs and tend the chickens that had grown thin during the difficult days. "The land remembers kindness," Tiana said softly to Bianca, pressing a small leather pouch of medicinal tea into her hands. "As do its people." Wilbert moved slower than usual, his injuries still tender, but his eyes shone with quiet joy as he directed the work. Men replaced broken shingles on the roof, while others cleared the trampled garden rows. The sound of hammers and saws filled the air, mixing with laughter and conversation. Near sunset, Reverend Green gathered everyone in a circle before the cabin. His thin frame stood tall as he lifted his hands toward the sky. "Lord," he prayed, his voice carrying across the yard, "bless this land and the faithful hearts who tend it. Let their love grow deeper than any roots, stronger than any storm. Amen." "Amen," the neighbors echoed, their voices united in hope. As twilight deepened, the helpers departed with promises to return. Soon only the crackling fireplace broke the evening quiet. Wilbert and Bianca sat close together in their wooden chairs, fingers intertwined, watching the flames dance. "I keep thinking of that first night," Bianca said softly, her free hand resting on her belly. "How scared I was, not knowing if you truly meant to keep me." Wilbert's thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "And now? Now I'm scared of different things." She turned to him, vulnerability in her eyes. "What if I'm not a good mother? What if something goes wrong?" Wilbert shifted his chair closer, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "You faced down a whole town to save our home. Reckon that shows plenty of mothering spirit already." A small laugh escaped her. "But what if we only have one child?" "Or what if?" "One child or 10, it don't matter none," Wilbert interrupted gently. "You're my family." "That's all I need." Bianca leaned into his embrace, remembering how she had once struggled just to lift a hay bale. "Remember how I dropped that bucket of feed my first morning here? Scattered it everywhere." "Remember how you kept at it until you got it right?" Wilbert countered, chuckling. "Knew right then you were stronger than you looked." The fire popped and sparked, casting warm light across the cabin's familiar walls. Outside, a whippoorwill called into the gathering night. Inside, the rooms felt alive again with possibility and love, every corner filled with the quiet certainty of belonging. Bianca stretched up to kiss Wilbert's cheek, her heart full. Their home, like their love, had weathered its storm and emerged stronger. Together they watched the flames and dreamed of the family yet to come. Spring arrived like a blessing, washing the valley in waves of tender green. Morning frost gave way to warm afternoons that coaxed wildflowers from the soil. The creek banks, once frozen and bare, now burst with delicate white and purple blossoms nodding in the breeze. Wilbert and Bianca walked hand in hand through their meadow, their footsteps leaving gentle impressions in the damp earth. Where railroad survey stakes had once threatened their peace, now only tall grass swayed. The land seemed to breathe easier, as if remembering its own freedom. "Remember when we first cleared these stakes?" Bianca asked, touching a patch of fresh clover. Her steps were slower now, more deliberate, as she carried their precious secret. Wilbert squeezed her hand. "Seems like yesterday and forever ago, all at once." His voice was gruff with emotion. The scars on his face had softened somehow over the past months, gentled by happiness. They paused by the creek where cattails rustled. A pair of meadowlarks darted overhead, weaving grass stems for their nest. The afternoon sun painted everything in honey gold light, making even the ordinary beautiful. Bianca's heart swelled with gratitude. How far they had come from that desperate night in the church, when she had stood trembling before the congregation. Now the same townsfolk who had once mocked her stopped by with gifts of jam and hand-sewn blankets, their hearts softened by her courage. At the creek's edge, where white petals drifted on the current, Bianca turned to face her husband. Without a word, she took his large, calloused hand and placed it gently on her rounded belly. The fabric of her dress was smooth beneath his palm. "5 sons will take time," she whispered, her eyes bright with joy and mischief. "But we've started." Wilbert's breath caught. His fingers trembled against her belly as if touching something sacred. Tears gathered in his eyes, turning them the color of summer sky. This giant of a man, who had faced war and wilderness without flinching, found himself undone by such tender hope. "A daughter, or sons," his voice broke. He had to clear his throat before continuing. "It don't matter none. You're my gift, Bianca. You and whatever blessings God sends us." He pulled her close, carefully, reverently. His arms encircled her as if she were made of precious glass, though they both knew her strength. Against his chest, Bianca closed her eyes, remembering all the nights she had prayed for love, never dreaming God would answer so completely. The sun began its slow descent, painting the western sky in strokes of gold and rose. Light caught in the pine needles and set the creek water ablaze with color. Even the cabin's windows seemed to catch fire, each pane reflecting glory. From the ridge above their homestead, a familiar figure appeared. Tiana stood outlined against the evening sky, her dark hair lifting in the breeze. She raised her hand in blessing, the gesture carrying all the weight of friendship and survival shared between their families. Bianca lifted her own hand in response, remembering how Tiana had stood beside her through the darkest days of Wilbert's imprisonment. The Apache woman's strength had helped her endure when hope seemed lost. Now their children would grow up knowing each other's languages, sharing stories across the old boundaries of fear. "She knew before I did," Bianca said softly. "About the baby. Said she saw it in my eyes." Wilbert nodded, understanding. Tiana sees clear. Always has. His hand remained protective over their growing child, as if already shielding it from harm. Together they watched the sun sink lower, setting the valley ablaze with farewell light. The air grew cool with evening, carrying the scent of pine and new grass. Soon the first stars would appear, faithful as God's promises. Behind them, their cabin glowed warm against the deepening twilight. Lamplight spilled from its windows like welcome, marking it as a sanctuary of second chances. Smoke curled from the chimney where supper waited, filling the air with the promise of home. How different it looked now from that first night, when Bianca had arrived frightened and unwanted. The cabin had grown beautiful with love, its rough logs softened by climbing roses, its yard brightened by the garden she had planted. Even the chicken coop wore a fresh coat of whitewash, gleaming in the last rays of sun. Wilbert turned to study his wife's face in the fading light. "Still glad you stood up that night?" he asked softly. "Still glad you chose a scarred old soldier?" Bianca reached up to trace the marks on his cheek, her touch gentle as a blessing. "Every single day," she whispered, "every single moment." A whippoorwill called from the shadowed woods, its voice sweet and lonely. But here, in this meadow where love had conquered fear, there was no loneliness, only the quiet triumph of faith rewarded and burdens lifted by grace. The sky deepened to purple as they walked back toward their glowing home. Each step carried them closer to the future they had fought to defend, a future bright with children's laughter and love's healing power. Their cabin stood steady against the gathering night, its windows warm with welcome. Like their love, it had weathered every storm to become a beacon of hope on the frontier, a testament to God's providence and the courage to believe in second chances. Inside waited the life they had built together, simple, strong, and more precious than gold. Outside, spring deepened into evening, wrapping their homestead in peace well-earned and joy complete. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines. It's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.